Hey everyone, it's the Koopa Man. Today I've got a thought for you. There's nothing wrong with superhero comic books as a medium. Yeah, I said it. Now hold up, before you grab the pitchforks, let me explain. I'm not here to defend the comic industry's current state. We all know the deal. Marvel and DC are pumping out stories that sometimes feel more like soapboxes than superhero sagas. That's not what I'm standing for. I'm talking about the core idea of superhero comic stories, their essence, and their potential. Lately, fans are so frustrated by the industry's missteps that they're willing to ditch the whole medium. And that's really not fair. It'd be like judging all video games by Dragon Age Veilguard. And as much as some certain Lucario-loving wife-beaters would love that, we shouldn't stoop to it. It'd be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So let's dive in. The primary criticism of superhero comics is this: they don't have endings. And the question from there is that really a bad thing? Well, no. And the fact most people use it as a criticism shows how little they understand the medium, as well as a trope of "and the adventure continues." A trope that's existed since the pulp age of entertainment with the Republic film serials, pulp novels, and of course, comic strips, the precursor to comic books. These were the OGs of the never-ending stories, and comic books just carried the torch. After all, comic books were, in essence, a product of their time, the 1930s and 40s. You don't really see anyone criticize pulp novels or adventure movies for the same issue. Nor do they go after other serialized comic series that have no endings, like Asterix, Tintin, and Scott Pilgrim Saves the Universe. Granted, that last one sort of does have an ending, but with how they franchised it and milked it until it was dry, you would not really realize that. And that's because the primary issue people have with the superhero genre of comics, which, like it or not, is that they're the bread and butter of the medium. The same way that action movies, rom-coms, and comedies are the bread and butter of the film industry, or the fairy tales were the bread and butter of Disney animated movies. Really, it all boils down to this: I don't like this specific genre. That's the vibe I get every time I debate with these comics should have endings crowd, or the why aren't comics more like manga folks. And here's the thing, slapping an ending on Batman or Spider-Man wouldn't fix what they're really mad about. At its core, it's just griping about a genre that doesn't click for them, wasn't built for them, and doesn't grab them. They're hiding behind a fake misunderstanding of the medium to dodge the truth. It's no different from those who storm into video games or movies yelling about racism and sexism, or lately, degeneracy and moral failings, then admit they never cared about the stuff they're tearing down. They're basically like this comic. So why don't superhero comics have endings then? Well, like I discussed earlier, that's because they aren't supposed to. The very first superheroes were born in the late 1930s into the 1940s, where pulp medium was king, and a large part of serialized pulp stories was that they would always end with the hero riding off into the sunset to have more adventures another day. This was true for Conan the Barbarian, Solomon Kane, Doc Savage, Dick Tracy, The Shadow, and many others like them. And usually their stories would be serialized week to week or month to month, just like comic book issues, usually through dime store novellas or radio dramas. As such, when Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created Superman in Action Comics #1, they did so using tropes that were common at the time. As a first issue, they used the first page to give a brief origin story, but it was very bare bones and just there to establish the story and setting. Everything after that point was just seeing the kinds of adventures Superman would get into. This would be the case when Jack Kirby and Joe Simon created Captain America, when Bob Kane and Bill Finger created Batman, and when William Marston and H.D. Peter created Wonder Woman. All of the Golden Age comic heroes were like this. Characters with simple origin stories to explain their fantastic powers and abilities, put in situations to entertain a reading audience. Though comic books have evolved past that. Nowadays they have something called
continuity. Boom.
Yeah, that. And having continuity can be both a blessing and a curse. On the positive side, it allows for more depth and epic storylines involving our heroes who now have a shared universe, heck, a shared multiverse in some cases, and it really helps with the world building and immersion qualities. On the downside, though, it can make certain stories kind of a mess, like how Joker wasn't arrested by the federal authorities and executed for his terrorist attack on Gotham in Long Halloween. I'm not saying those problems don't exist. They do, but really, they only amount to nitpicks at the end of the day. Of course, Batman doesn't kill the Joker because it goes against Batman's character to do so, and of course, the Joker isn't put in front of a firing squad and executed like he deserves because he's a popular villain for a reading readers and writers, so it'd be a waste to get rid of him. It'd be like asking why doesn't Tom just kill Jerry once and for all. It's never gonna happen because that's not the point of Tom and Jerry. Comic books may have evolved since the 30s and 40s, but they are still, at the end of the day, the same sorts of stories they were when Action Comics #1 hit newsstands. Superheroes are involved in deeper stories now than they were in the Golden Age, but that doesn't mean they're a deep genre. At the end of the day, they exist to show pulp-like action-adventure stories with characters who audiences can recognize at a glance. It's the same trick Super Mario pulls. That plumber's been jumping on Goombas for decades. Same basic setup every time. Bowser kidnaps Peach, Mario runs in, and we're off. No one's asking for the end of Super Mario Bros., they just want the next castle. Comics roll the same way. Recognizable heroes, endless adventures. That's the game, and it's been winning since the pulp days. And that's where the comparison to manga comes in, specifically shonen action manga. Those have endings, right One Piece? Okay, that's a bit of a low-hanging fruit, but in truth, manga are a similar medium to American superhero comics, but they are not the same thing. Not even remotely. The industry of manga is night and day different from how DC and Marvel and even Image Comics do things. For one, manga are more creator-driven than comics. Superman didn't stop being produced at the deaths of Spiegel and Schuster, obviously, but the same can be said for Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse. But when a mangaka dies, it's usually when the manga ends. Kentaro Miura passed away recently, and it caused a panic on whether or not Berserk would be completed. And even now, what we're seeing is being drawn and written based on the notes he left behind to his apprentices. The same can be said for any Dragon Ball story that will be created and released after the death of Akira Toriyama in March of 2024, with Dragon Ball Daima being the last thing he personally worked on. And while ultimately the story of Dragon Ball belongs to Akira Toriyama, he did train a successor in Toyotaro who has been the lead on the Dragon Ball Super manga until Toriyama's tragic passing. But by and large, stories like Yu Yu Hakusho, Naruto, Bleach, and the like all have beginnings, middles, and endings. Or do they? Can you say Naruto would be largely the same story if you added additional story arcs into the narrative between the first chapter and the last? Say, a plot about a ninja ostrich. Yeah, I'm going there. Filler as a concept is proof that while manga do have definitive beginnings and endings, they're largely the same type of story. They only choose to end because the creator-driven natures means that if the creator wants to end a story, they can, and do. There would be nothing stopping Naruto from continuing forever, which is why Boruto exists. Or heck, look at One Piece. Oda even hid the fact that he has no intention of ending the story in the story itself.
あいつらの言う新時代ってのはクソだ。海賊が夢を見る時代が終わるって？おい！なんだ人の夢は終わらねえ!
In fact, saying that manga have endings and comics don't as a point against comics would be incredibly dishonest because then you have manga like Goggle 13, Hajime no Ippo, and Detective Conan. The fact is, there are manga that do operate like superhero comics, mangas that operate like pulp Adventure of the Month stories. In fact, if you step outside of the Shonen Jump publication, you'll find that there are far more manga like these than there are like Naruto and Bleach. It's just that most people who make the comparison don't know that there are manga outside of Dragon Ball, Naruto, and Bleach. And even then, because of the differences in the industry, mangas being more creatively led, publications being more cutthroat with titles and sales, and even in how both deal with their advertisers, the comparison is really apples to oranges. As such, it's a little dishonest and unfair to make such a comparison. It'd be like saying, I like video games more than movies, and demanding movies to be more interactive, or vice versa, and making The Last of Us, and then taking over Sony PlayStation as a whole. But let's pretend Batman did pass on his mantle and retired. What then? Does that fix everything? Not really, as anyone Bruce would train would have to carry on his same code and principles. In fact, Batman was succeeded a few times by Terry McGinnis in Batman Beyond, and by his first Robin, Dick Grayson, in the comics post-Final Crisis. Both times, the characters largely faced the same sorts of stories and adventures, granted with Terry having a more cyberpunk neo-noir edge to it as it was set 50 years in the future. And let's be honest, did any of the Be More Like manga fans like it when Naruto passed the baton on to Boruto? No, of course they didn't. Nobody likes Boruto. The ultimate point is this. Superhero comics don't have endings because they aren't supposed to. They aren't for those types of stories. There's no happily ever after. Superheroes are very much like the gods and heroes of the Greeks and the Vikings, who would continue having stories again and again. Heracles has several stories outside of his 11 labors, and how many times have heroes been spawned from Zeus just fucking around? Some comic heroes, like Wonder Woman and the mighty Thor, are even this quite literally. They're just continuing the stories that were told of them and their archetypes centuries ago. A superhero is less a character and more a character archetype. Sure, they all have their secret origins, but after that, it's a series of adventures you can read week to week or month to month. The evolution of the genre does not change what comics are at their roots. Batman and Punisher will always have criminals to fight. Superman and Wonder Woman will always have people to save. The X-Men will always be feared and hated by the world they protect because the nation of Israel, which they are an allegory for, is still feared and hated by communists, Nazis, internet weirdos, and food fetishists. Sure, you can point to how mean-spirited the Peter Parker will always be a loser edict that Marvel is for Spider-Man as a reason why this has to change, but for the greater history of Spider-Man's publication, this was not the case, and yet he still struggled with the great power coming with great responsibility. It did not stop him from marrying Mary Jane Watson, it did not stop him from pursuing his dream of becoming a science teacher, and the only reason they reverted him back is because current Marvel editorial and writers do not understand the medium they work in either. Just because the writers don't understand the genre and medium doesn't mean everyone should follow in their footsteps and deliberately misunderstand it too. In the end, if you don't like how superheroes don't have endings, then it's not for you. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. Not everyone is required to like everything. But don't start engaging in dishonest arguments about how everything should change to suit what you like, because that's stupid, selfish, and the exact problem that's going on in all our favorite franchises right now. Let superheroes be superheroes. Today, tomorrow, and into infinity and beyond. But that's my thoughts on it. This has been the Koopa Man. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe as it helps me with the algorithm. If you'd like to discuss more about how superheroes shouldn't change to appease non-superhero fans, talk about it in the comments. And, until next time, game on.